I'm Tracy Martin, Director of Quaker Council for European Affairs. It's really great to see you all. So in this session, I'll just give a brief introduction. Then we're going to have a little quiz, but it's not a competition, so don't worry. And then there'll be a presentation, and then we'll have some opportunity to discuss together in groups. And we'll finish with some things that you could do. I have to say I'm not an expert on the Council of Europe. I'm going to speak from my experience and my knowledge, but I'm aware that there are some people here who probably know a lot more than I do, and that's great. We're very grateful to have your knowledge. May not be time to share it in plenary, but certainly in the small groups. And for those of you who are very new to the Council of Europe, we will attempt to keep things clear and simple, but there will be some time for questions as well. So in a moment, you should see on your screen some questions to answer. I'll read them out. There are 5 questions, and in order to see them all, you need to scroll down to the end of the quiz. If you can't see the quiz, don't worry, because I will read out the questions and you can just do it in a notebook. We're not going to name and shame anybody, so don't worry about that. So those of you who can see, you just get on with it, and then I'll read out. So the first question is, in which year was the Council of Europe founded? And there are 4 options: 1945, 1949, 1973, and 1993. That's the first question. The second question: name a European country which is not a member of the Council of Europe. So you only have to choose one, but one country that is not a member of the Council of Europe. The third question: how many conventions and charters have been developed and are monitored by the Council of Europe? There are 3 options. 1, so 1 convention or charter, more than 50, or more than 200. The fourth question is a yes/no question. Does the Council of Europe have a parliament? So just yes or no. And the last question: when and where was the last Council of Europe Heads of State Summit? And there are 3 options: Reykjavik 2023, Warsaw 2005, and Vienna 1993. So I can see that some of you are answering, so I'll give you a bit more time to answer. So, in which year was the Council of Europe founded? So as you can see, the correct answer was 1949. So well done, 70% of you got that right. That's very good. The other dates, well, 1945 is the end of war, but 1973 and 1993 are dates linked to the European Union, with which, of course, the Council of Europe is often confused. But 1949, so really a result of the Second World War, and countries coming together to look at how they could work on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. So this one only tells you how many of you all answered it, but anybody like to just unmute and say a country that's not a member?
Russia.
Russia's not a member. Russia was a member until 2022, and with the invasion, left, was pushed to leave really in 2022. So yeah, so has been, but is not anymore at the moment. Any other countries?
Biélorussie. Ah, sorry.
Sorry? Joelle, go first, and then whoever.
Biélorussia.
Belarus is also and has never been a member. There's only one other that's not a member, according to this, and of course, people's idea of where Europe starts and finishes isn't always the same, so bear that in mind. Vatican City, observer status, apparently. And there are some states with limited recognition. So, for instance, North Cyprus, because they're contested. And it's also interesting to know that Turkey is a member. So there are 46 states in all. So well done if you got one of the ones that isn't a member. How many conventions and charters have been developed and are monitored by the Council of Europe? Oh, we were very mixed on this one, but actually there are more than 200. It's on the website, at least there are more than 200, although some of them are some of the conventions, some are charters, and some are protocols and additions, so which is really an addition to a charter. And I didn't go through them all and check which was which, I'm afraid. But yes, there are many more than most of us know the Convention on Human Rights, which is the most well known, I think. But there's also a social charter, the European Charter on Local Self-Government, and the conventions on children's rights, audiovisual heritage, and the manipulation of sports competitions, among many. And I'll give you some links at the end, and you can look at all the list if you like. Does the Council of Europe have a parliament? Okay, so the answer is yes, it does have a parliament. It's usually called PACE, the Parliamentary Assembly. So I guess you could argue it's not a parliament, it's a parliamentary assembly of the Council of Europe. And it's made up of elected politicians, but they're not elected to that parliamentary assembly. They're elected in their home countries, and then the home countries select. I know how they do it in the UK, which is just the government selects people, or the parliament selects people. I'm not sure if it's the same in every country, to be honest, so I'm not quite sure. But they are elected officials, but not elected to that parliamentary assembly. And they meet in Strasbourg, I think, twice a year. And when and where was the last Council of Europe Heads of State Summit? Yeah, quite a few of you got that. Reykjavik was the last one last year. And there have only been those three, actually. So Vienna, Warsaw, and Reykjavik. So it's quite significant that they had one last year. And I will talk a little bit more about the outcomes of that summit and how civil society sought to influence it, and also to hold the Council of Europe and its member states to account about what came out of it. Great. So I won't ask who got well, maybe I shouldn't. I won't ask who got 5 out of 5 and who got 0 out of 5. I won't name and shame you. But I hope you all learned, maybe most of you learned something new from that. So I'm going to share my screen now and say a little bit more about the Council of Europe, and in particular, how civil society and QCEA engages with it. So I think I can make a mistake. So move things around. So this is a bit of some of the things we've been talking about. So almost all European countries are members of the Council of Europe. So why is it important? It upholds human rights, democracy, and the rule of law in Europe. And it does that through conventions that states have to ratify, so they don't always ratify, but that's how it seeks to hold them, and it also gives guidelines around those things as well. Through the European Court of Human Rights, it provides additional legal protection and an alternative to national courts. So that means that if you have taken your concern, you feel your rights have been violated, you've taken them through the local justice system, you can then move on to the European Court of Human Rights. And in some countries, you might go directly there rather than trying to go through the local system as well. And the ECHR, which is the European Court of Human Rights, the rulings provide legal precedents, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. There are conventions on specific issues that are important. I mean, one of the most important ones recently is the Istanbul Convention, which was on domestic violence and violence against women. So you can try and get your your government to ratify those conventions, and then they fall under the remit, and they're supposed to follow the articles of the convention. Okay, my slides have got stuck. Let me just exit full screen, and then I can move them this way. Maybe that's. So these are just a couple of examples of court cases. The most recent one, which was only a couple of weeks ago, and actually I was in Strasbourg at the time, was this top one, the Verein Klimasenioren and Schweiz and others versus Switzerland, where the court found that the Swiss Confederation had failed to comply with its duties under the Convention concerning climate change. So this was very significant, for it's the first time that a court's really said that legally a state is obliged to protect people from climate change. So there were actually 3 cases, all on this theme, but only one of them where the court found in the favour of the people bringing the case. So that's a significant one. And then there's another one, the 2024 one, which was versus Turkey, that said a system which provided for no alternative service or any effective and accessible procedure for the examination of a claim of conscientious objection could not be seen as having struck a fair balance between the general interest of society and that of conscientious objectors. So that's an important one for Quakers. It's not the only one, and there are several cases on conscientious objection, particularly from Greece and Cyprus, quite often go to the European Court of Human Rights. And an early one, 2015, ALXW versus Russia. This was the court's ruled that deporting a man to China, where he might be sentenced to death, would violate the right to life and the prohibition of torture, inhuman and degrading treatment. So then the person was granted temporary asylum. So that's linked to migration, but it's also linked to the death sentence. And the Council of Europe has been against the death penalty for a long time, and it's something it's well known for. So those are some of the reasons why it's important. Some challenges faced. So the first one, and you perhaps won't be surprised to hear this, is non-compliance with court rulings, and a feeling that there's a lack of sanctions. Actually, there are sanctions, but they're rarely used. And it's not uncommon for countries not to abide by the ruling. The UK is a particularly bad offender, though not the only one. And as you will have read in the news, particularly again if you're in the UK, you know, consistently referring to the European Court of Human Rights as a foreign court, despite the fact that, you know, the UK was involved in setting it up and has signed the convention. There's a lack of finance. So the population of the 46 countries is 675 million. So the obligatory contributions, that means what the states have to pay, is 385 million. So that's about €0.50 per person. This is in euros, sorry, which, you know, is not very much really. And a total budget of 625 million. I mean, if you compare it to the billions that the EU has, it's not very much. There's a lack of awareness. Often there's a confusion between the EU and the Council of Europe, not helped by the fact that the EU has a European Council. So that often means it's not well understood, and it doesn't get so much media coverage. For organizations like QCEA, engaging with the Council of Europe when you also engage with the EU is quite challenging. There's when you've got a small capacity and not a lot of funding. It's not so everything happens in Strasbourg, and that costs money and staff time. So that can be quite challenging, I think, for smaller organizations. It's better actually now after COVID because a lot more things are online, which is helpful. So something about civil society. So QCEA has participatory status at the Council of Europe. And in fact, today I was just filling in our quadrennial 4-year report to maintain that status. We've had it since 1981. I think it's fair to say how much we've engaged with it has gone up and down over that time, depending on capacity and what we're working for. And we're a member then of the Committee of INGOs. So the Committee of INGOs has a secretariat within the Council of Europe and is the body through which INGOs can engage with the Council through working committees. And there are different parts of the council. There is the Council of Ministers, there's the Parliament, and there's also the Council of the Regions. So there's different parts you can engage with. The civil society often sits on expert working groups and provides expert advice to the Council of Europe. And in other ways, often there are some civil society organizations that help people to bring court cases as well. So some of the things we're working on now as civil society, so we tend to work with others on this through the CINGO, the Council of INGOs. So these are all things before the Reykjavik summit. Civil society met to agree what we would like to come out of the summit, and we submitted that to the ministers. Some of the things came out, some of them didn't so much, but some of the things that we asked for was more civil society engagement. Enabling civil society to access the Council of Europe, involving us in developing conventions and implementation and reporting. Better implementation of the court judgments was something, and in fact the heads of state did commit to that, though they haven't said how they'll do that. And an important one for QCEA was the protocol on the right to clean and healthy environment. So this is an initiative to add a protocol to the Convention on Human Rights on the right to clean and healthy environment. Actually, at the UN level, there already is a right to clean and healthy environment, and most other regional bodies have this right in their conventions. So Europe's lagging a bit behind on that. I think maybe the Swiss case may help in the case for that. More generally, just that implement what's in the Reykjavik declaration, and I'll give you a link to that if you want to look. But of course, there are other things that civil society is working on: gender justice, rights of the child, protection of migrants, legislation around and guidance around artificial intelligence. And there are working committees on all those things. I'll maybe just say a little bit more about QCEA. So we do. So for us, the Council of Europe's important because it's because it's wider than the European Union, and it should be said that there is much talk about the European Union becoming a member of the Council of Europe. I'm not sure how that works. I mean, all its member states are members, but becoming a member as well. And of course, it has its own court, which also causes some confusion. And that court sometimes takes very similar cases. And in actual fact, I talked to migration organizations that take courts about migration on behalf of asylum seekers and migrants to courts. And sometimes they choose between the courts because depending on the makeup of the courts and the issue, then one court might be more amenable than the other. And I was told recently that actually for migration, but this was before the European Migration Pact was signed, so that may change. Then there was a preference for the EU court at the moment, but that will probably change because of the Migration Pact. Yeah. I will do some resources at the end, but there are some very, I think there's some very interesting guidelines, like about local self-government, for example. The social charter is very interesting, and covers a lot of areas that Quakers would be interested in. So these are just some thoughts about what you can do. So I think particularly in countries where there's some skepticism about the Council of Europe, it's important to think about how you can tell people, explain to people why it's important for protecting human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, and particularly the role of the court. So all your countries will have parliamentary representatives who sit in the Parliamentary Assembly. And one of the things I hear from civil society is, well, you know, they talk the talk while they're in Strasbourg, but then they go back to their countries and they forget about it. So you can find out who they are. In the UK, if you look on the Parliament website, it will tell you. If you Google for Council of Europe parliamentary reps, there are quite a lot of them actually. I'm not sure for other countries how you'd find that out, but I'm sure you can. And the specific thing at the moment we're asking is for them to support having a protocol for clean and healthy environment. But of course you can approach them about other things as well. But that's the thing that we as QCEA at the moment are most particularly interested in. Yeah, I mean, whatever topic you're interested in, it's worth looking at the relevant conventions or guidelines, because then you can check and see if your government's ratified it, and if they haven't implemented, you can ask them, or in some cases lobby for them to ratify if they haven't. I know that happened a lot for instance, on the Istanbul Convention. That once it was done, you know, people worked very hard in their countries, and there was gave it a lot of visibility and pressured governments to follow the convention. If you're working on a particular issue, it might be worth looking at the judgments. All the judgments are on the Council of Europe website to see if there's any judgments that might help you press for change. Similar to the one against Switzerland recently, for example. And I think we can all work to protect and expand civic space. I mean, there's an awareness that there are quite a few countries in the Council of Europe who are restricting civic space, and in fact, many countries, including here in Belgium, where I am now, including the UK. where the right to protest and the right to and access to decision makers is being restricted. So it's something I think we should all be working on. And finally, here are some, we'll send you this, the slides, so you can see, but I've just put some here. So there's some facts about Council of Europe, there's something about the committees, the Reykjavik Declaration. And there's the last one is for those of you from the UK is a discussion about the consequences of leaving the European Court of Human Rights, which you might find interesting. But as always, if you do have questions about QCEA's work, then do get in touch with us. We will soon be having a new website, and we'll be sending those of you on the email list details about that, so you can join. We have a newsletter every 2 months, and I have my treasurer here, so I should also say you can also, of course, donate to QCEA. Details are on the website and in the newsletter. But thank you so much, all of you. It's been good to spend time with you this evening, and thank you for your interest.